Hi, my name is Cam. I'm a cinematographer and editor with StoryKeep. I work closely with the director to craft a film from start to finish that feels authentic and powerful, all the way from filming interviews to diving deep into an edit to elevate these stories. In my own life, it's always been super important for me to document and archive memories. I've always taken film photos throughout my whole life of my family, my brothers, my mom and my dad, and now my new twins. And I think having those memories preserved for a lifetime is something that's super important to me. And I think in the same vein, it's on a whole nother level with a legacy film where you're hearing stories from the older generations, especially about the values that have shaped the family and stories that are important to them. And think bringing those all together to create a cohesive film is something that just grows more powerful as time goes on, having that for preservation's sake, but also for the sake of future generations becoming inspired by these stories of hard work and determination that brought the family to where it is today. I'm thinking in my own life, and my own grandfather, who I never had a chance to meet. I can't imagine how special it would be for me to hear him tell some stories I might never have heard, or even just to hear his voice would be really special. And I think that's kind of the value that StoryKeep can bring. And so if that sounds interesting to you or your family or a family you support, please don't hesitate in reaching out.
Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. First, let me say how happy, how delighted I am that you're joining us for the show. If it's your first time, if it's your seventh time, welcome. This is a place where we have uncommon conversations about things that matter deeply, the people we love, and the purpose that we are giving to our own lives and legacies. Our mission at StoryKeep is to capitalize on the power of story for profound good in families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, creating personal films and private podcasts that help a family navigate their shared narrative. Our work is designed to deepen connections. My conversations on this podcast center around two questions. The first is, whose life story from your family would you most want to see documented? And the second for my guest is, what are you as a person and as a professional hoping to create and leave behind? Today, I'm honored to welcome Michael Holden to the podcast. Michael is a speaker, author, and father of three who left a 2-decade career in finance to pursue a life rooted in family, faith, and authenticity. He is the author of The Authenticity Deficit and runs a growing platform dedicated to helping others live with purpose and meaning. Today, Michael is here to talk about his mother, who he describes as the most loving, kind, and brave woman he knows. Born into a large farming family in India, she was sent to a convent boarding school at just 5 years old, where she was raised and educated by nuns until she was 21. In 1969, she immigrated to the U.S. to help fill a national shortage of medical professionals. Eventually, she settled in Illinois, where she has lived for over 45 years. Her story is one of quiet strength and immense grace. As a single woman arriving in a new country in the 1970s, she built a life from scratch, working in medicine and raising a family with fierce love and selflessness. Michael shares moments that reveal just how deeply she has shaped him, from defending and nurturing his restlessness, expressive spirit as a young boy, and stepping in to save his daughter's life during a medical crisis, as well as becoming one of his closest companions in grief after the death of his dad. Today, they talk almost every day. Their bond has carried them through some of life's hardest and holiest moments, Michael says. He also shares a powerful reminder: don't wait. He had some pretty hard conversations with his mother over the years. He's asked her deep questions, and when he moved back to Chicago, he threw her a celebration, not because she was gone, but because she was still here. He calls it one of the greatest luxuries of living in authenticity, the chance to honor your loved ones while they are still here with you. As a kid, Michael talked too much, moved too fast, and felt everything very deeply. Teachers may have seen him as a problem, but his mom saw his potential. Her belief in him helped rewrite his own story. And today he just calls her, every morning to thank her for that. So settle in. You're about to hear a remarkable story and one very enthusiastic man. This is Who We Remember. Let's dive in. Hi, Michael. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you. I'm so thankful to be here, Jamie.
Yeah, I have to say, I do have a very warm place in my heart when a male guest decides to speak about his mom. There's just something really, I don't know if you know Brian Hughes, and there's been several, but Brian Hughes comes to mind. He spoke about his mother, and there's just a really special family dynamic there. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about her since our first conversation. Here's the thing I want to share that is just remarkable. First of all, your mom is living. She's 82 years old and seems to be in bright spirits, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And your mom lives in Illinois, but she was born in India, one of 8 children, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell just a little bit about her upbringing and coming to the United States?
Yes. And again, thanks so much for having me on. To be able to come and speak about my mother, who's such an extraordinary portion of my heart. It's a true honor. So thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Well, Mom had an interesting upbringing. She was born in the southernmost tip of India, the state of Kerala, and she grew up on a farm, a cattle farm, oddly. And in this cattle farm, one thing to understand about India is predominantly a Hindu religion / Muslim religion country. And my mom was from a Roman Catholic family, which represents 0.00001 of that population, quite literally.
Yeah.
So boys stayed back to work the farm with my grandfather, and the girls, outside of my mom's baby brother, went to boarding school, which in this case, the boarding schools were convents. So my mother, her education experience started at the age of 5, where she explained to me that she'd be gone for 9, 10, and 11 months per year and would come home only on the vacation portions. And there would only be very nominal or minimal opportunities for the parents to come and visit the children. And I got a kick out of Mom's comment. She said it was 100 miles away from the house. And back then, negotiating 100 miles was a whole lot different than what 100 miles today would be. So to have a surprise visit for Mom or Dad was almost impossible.
Wow. And she was in that convent in a boarding school situation until she was 21. And then I don't know how old she was in 1969, but that is the year when she immigrated, correct?
That is correct. And after boarding school, I did just learn Mom was valedictorian of her class, which is not surprising, but makes me very proud. And prior to getting the letter from Northwestern Hospital here in Chicago, which we'll talk about more, Mom did receive funding from the Indian government, where she not only taught nurses, but she was a midwife who taught midwives to be midwives. And they were funded by the government to go to the most socioeconomically degraded portions of India and help women. Now, I've been to India, and it's been years, and I'm born and raised America. So it's different for me to go to India than someone who was born there. The level of poverty in population dense areas is so far beyond the scope of most of our understanding. Simply stated, it's horrific. And I learned that Mom's job was to go to the worst of the worst, the hardest of the hardest, and teach women how to, poorly stated, catch babies or be midwives to people who had zero medical attention whatsoever. And Mom was doing this for years before getting a letter from Northwestern Hospital. where in 1969 it was referred to as the brain drain. And the brain drain was there was a deficit in medical professionals nationally within the United States. So as such, mom received a correspondence saying, if you come to Northwestern here in Chicago, we will give you citizenship and we will move your family, which was just her and dad at that point.
Yeah.
And so mom complied. Now, maybe for a podcast of at another time, my father was English. He was from Sussex, England, and came from every forefather we had was British military. And he was serving in India and happened to meet my mother. Dad was not happy about the notion of going to America at all. He adored his wife and followed suit. And I think actually it was almost 2 years that dad didn't just come with mom. Mom came by herself as a female in the late 1960s. Even saying it out loud, there's just so much bravery in that. So she came here. She loves to tell us that she came with $7 or $8 in her hand. And fast forward almost 40 years, she retired as an interim chief nursing officer for a major hospital in Chicago.
Wow. So this gives me some better context, I think, for a story that you've shared with me about we're jumping a little bit here, but when you were young, when you were in kindergarten, like 5 years old or so, all of this sort of health training, but also dealing with all different kinds of people in the world and maybe working with folks in India who people think there's not a lot of potential here, but she's working hand in hand, eye to eye with people, seeing everyone's humanity and their potential. And so she ends up having children, you being one of them. And when you were 5, you were in kindergarten, and I guess you were diagnosed with ADHD and sort of thought that your teacher sort of thought you should be held back. And your mom had a completely different notion about that. Can you talk about that and how sort of maybe her medical but humanitarian training came into play as a mom?
Yes. That's my first hero story for my mother that I can remember, where I would say my mom is my hero. At age 5, I wasn't diagnosed by a medical doctor. My kindergarten teacher called for a meeting with mom and dad. And Miss Cook, at the time, I remember from 1985, had said that I had disciplinary issues, that I was over hyper, that I had issues with paying attention to detail, and that I'll never forget, because here I am sitting with my mom and dad. They're coming from after work, and she's saying all these things. And Miss Cook looks at me and says, if these were older days, I would put you over my lap and give you a spanking. And she says this in front of my mom and dad. And it was early 80s, so different colloquial jargon at the time. But my mom very gently said, with all due respect, you are not a medical professional. And for you to even state, she said, I think it was maybe, she suggested that I take Valium. And my mother very gently said, for you to even insinuate by being a kindergarten teacher that you have any autonomy to prescribe or consider to prescribe medications to my 5-year-old it's outlandish and it's ridiculous. And Miss Cook was so taken aback, because I don't know what she was expecting from that meeting. But my mother ended up really doubling down on her nun training and homeschooling me just in that summer before first grade. So she somewhat scolded the teacher and looked to me and really believed in me, and with her mother's love defended me from a really inappropriate allegation, is the right word. I think at that time there was a big ADHD craze where it was like, oh, do these kids have it? And it really wasn't. ADHD wasn't my situation. Yeah. And mom homeschooled me and would give nun antics where, say, I had to read, I think was it called Brahms Tales? I had to read Brahms Tales at age 6, and she would say, okay, you have these 25 vocabulary words. I expect you to get through these 3 chapters. When I get home from work, you will not only know how to spell all 25 words, You'll write a sentence for each of the 25 words. And then you're going to tell me a story about your day incorporating the 25 words. And I was 6. You know,
These are kind of high standards, Michael. Whoa.
by the time I was 7 and I went to first grade, I was pulled out of regular class and put into the gifted classes. And for the rest of my stay till high school, I was never in regular standard rooms. I was in a group of 10 or 15 where most of us graduated high school by either mid sophomore year or junior year. And so I graduated high school a year and a half early. And it really, I mean, that helps when I really think about what that did for me. Was instead of being put into a context of being in deficit, my mother's love and trust allowed for me to be put into a context of abundance. And that cascades for the rest of your life, regardless of all the pop-up surprises that life presents. But that love, faith, and devotion for me started at age 5 that I can remember. That, mom's just a priceless, unforgettable, amazing human being.
Mm. And to have the strength, I feel like so many mothers, parents, etc., especially young parents, when they get feedback from, these authorities, so to speak, that you can feel insecure. And yet she had the complete opposite sort of, and I can imagine from her experience, like, as you say, catching babies and helping teach other people, she had a whole other level of confidence. I think what's so beautiful as well, there's 2 other stories that I'd really love to have you share. And I feel like this is from your childhood. And then, we're obviously skipping a little bit here, but you had children later with your wonderful wife. And then she's a grandmother at this point in this story. And your daughter had an episode, a moment of crisis. I'm wondering if you can tell that story about your mom's fortitude.
Yes, there's so many thoughts that flurry to my heart as you pose this question. I remember making a post on Facebook when we have 3 children, and when Rebecca was expecting Elizabeth, our firstborn. I had so many questions. I was nervous about everything. Like, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? And only then, in my early 30s, did I learn my mom was a midwife. And now mom's instructing us on, okay, just be calm. This is the process. And ultimately, I'm just like nodding my head with just awe, saying, my goodness, this mother of mine, I'm a grown man who's married, yet she continues to take me to school. By the way, I feel that way now. And, you shared in the introduction that I do speak to my mom every day, and I still am. It's just such a beautiful relationship. Now, my daughter's situation, she's my middle daughter, Catherine. At age 3, I called my mom. Well, we were on a road trip, the family, and we were in Duluth, Minnesota. And I looked at my wife.
Way up north, way up north.
We were way up north.
Had to hit
And
Canada right there.
yes. My wife is a nurse practitioner and also pediatric certified, amongst other things. But I looked at my wife, Rebecca, and I said, something's not quite right with our 3-year-old. I'm not sure, but she just seems funny to me. And Rebecca said, no, she's fine. And I'm like, it was a very hot day. And I said, all right, we're going home. Everyone get in the car. Something's wrong. I feel like Catherine's having seizures. And Rebecca assures me, no, these are not seizures. I said, we're just going home. I don't like this. We get home. I go straight to the emergency room against my wife's counsel. And I said, this child's having seizures. Something's terribly wrong. And they somewhat laughed at me like, who are you? Are you a doctor? Where did you learn this? And they did the tests. No, she's not having seizures. Okay. Well, I then call my mother, who's in Illinois. I'm in Minnesota. And I said, Mom, I trust my gut. Something is wrong. So she said, okay, go to a pediatrician and let's see what the pediatrician says. Next day, I'm at the pediatrician. Pediatrician says, oh, we think she might have pandas, which was a non-recognized diagnosis in almost any hospital. It's almost like it's an aftermath of strep throat. I called Mom. I don't know. This doctor gave me some non-submissible diagnosis. I don't get it. She goes, okay, Mike, well, let me call. Let's get you a neurologist. Okay. Now mom flies in from Minnesota to meet me with the neurologist because she knows I am panicked. The neurologist does the testing, the whatever the EKG thing, and neurologist sits with my mother and says, "No, there's nothing wrong with this child. I understand your husband's really upset about it, but there's nothing showing on the diagnostics." Fast forward a week later, my 3-year-old collapses at a field trip in Minnesota and ends up in the hospital for months, where we find she was having 10 seizures an hour. 10 seizures an hour. So today, and that did result in some pretty, as you can imagine, some pretty scary situations of not knowing if Catherine was going to wake up. And that was one of the most challenging portions of my life. And what ended up, thankfully, we were in the Mayo Clinic, which their specialty is cancer, but they're okay at pediatric epilepsy. And what ended up emerging in Catherine's journey, we're 7 years into Catherine's epilepsy journey now, is that we put her on a Mayo Clinic issued ketogenic diet. So it's not like a Men's Health magazine or whatever these fad keto diets are. This was, to the utmost degree that I can think of, medicinally issued. So there was teams of people issuing Catherine's diet, which meant 4 meals a day measured to the 10th of a gram. And if they were not measured to a 10th of a gram, it could exacerbate the child's seizures. So no pressure. And
For sure at all. Oh my gosh. Wow.
I had
Okay.
a job at the time. I was a senior executive for a Fortune 500 company. I was attending an Ivy League executive MBA on top of that. And I had a child who we didn't know if she was going to live or die. And if you can imagine, this had an impact on my wife, and had a really difficult impact on my wife. And the stress of measuring these meals day in and day out, it became impossible. And that's where I put the SOS out call to my mother. Mom, we really need help. We still have the other 2 kids. We're still doing all these other things. And mom would come, but then ultimately she'd come to our apartment in Minnesota, but then ultimately said, you know what? Why don't we just have me take Catherine back to Illinois so that I can operate from my house and what I'm comfortable with. And so Catherine went back with Grandma Holden, which then what elapsed was my wife ended up leaving Minnesota and following. And then I was without my family for about 9 months before I resigned and came back to Chicago to follow. But in that time, I would tell you that my mother not only gave me life, but she saved my daughter's life. She literally saved my daughter's life by having the wherewithal and the discipline and the love. And I'm going to find some pictures to send you of mom with Catherine, just the 2 of them during that time. The picture of Catherine before, while in Minnesota, to the Catherine with, I mean, my mother's name is Catherine. I named my second daughter Catherine with full intention. So the C squared, or the 2 Catherines, it was divine. It just shows, even talking about it, I'm getting goosebumps because my mother has been a servant to her faith for her whole life. And she didn't get into medicine because of the thought of where she would have actually ended up. She got in because she felt called by God to serve his people. And she illustrates it so masterfully in my life, in my children's life. Now, I'm not going to give you the full long story, but I'm a cancer survivor. And I was living in Rhode Island. I moved to wherever the president would tell me. And in that time, I got my first diagnosis for cancer. Well, guess who flew into Rhode Island was my mom. And my mom did the research around, okay, this Rhode Island offering's not good. We ended up at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And I ended up meeting with the head of the type of cancer I had, all because of mom. And mom she's just illustrated this advocate, cornerstone, faith-based presence of service and love, not to just me, not to just my family, but so many people. And I love that. I love that about her.
I have to say that this is such a beautiful example, the life story of your mom. And I know we're just touching on a few of these pieces of her story and her journey, but even what you've just shared, It's such a reminder to me, and I really just want to put this out there, that families who do end up documenting one person's life story or documenting the family history in some capacity, so often we look to the founder of the business or, the quote unquote head of the family. Um, and there are other incredibly important family members who are, as you say, these foundational um, uh, structures. They create a foundational structure underneath everything else that whatever else is going on can flourish, right? You're the heading up a Fortune 500 company, not able to do that at all, right? Without the support, love, and guidance of your mom as well as your wife and others. So I feel like it is just a reminder again of how important the many stories there are in a family, not
Yeah.
just the quote unquote successful one or the leader, but the spiritual leader or the person who's really holding down the family roost, so to speak. So anyway, I just want to point that out because I feel like this is such a beautiful example of that.
Well, I agree. I think even with Catherine's epilepsy journey, my cancer journey, we've had so many things to grow from. It takes a village. And to your point, sometimes we just look for the head figure of that village, but without the village, it's just impossible. There's no one person who has succeeded without the many helping them do it.
So true. I really want to get to sort of how your mom and her impact and her story has infused you as a person, as a professional, and also a big leap of faith that you've sort of recently made, I think, in part due to your mom's influence. But we have to talk about the fact that when you and I spoke in preparation of this conversation, you, being your incredibly enthusiastic self, decided to go interview your mom. And can you just talk a little bit about what you decided to talk to her about and kind of the result of that, the ripple effect in your family?
Sure. There's just so many things that come to mind because, well, I've shared some of our stories in part of that, even before this 1 hour and 10-minute interview I just had with my mother in preparation for today's call. I had to get emergency spinal surgery when I was in Minnesota during Catherine's thing. And Catherine was in Chicago with my wife, and I was by myself. So again, mom flies. Remember, mom's 82, and so mom flies to Minnesota and takes care of me while I had my spinal surgery. And in that time, I mean, I couldn't move. I was bedridden, and I was just in this little tiny apartment. And she was just sitting next to me, and she'd put like a washcloth on my head, and she'd make sure I was taking the medications, and she'd say, okay, you have to try to get up. And it emerged in time to where I could take a walker and go around the block. And in that time, I said, Mom, I want to ask you every question that's on my heart in case we're not with each other. And at the time, I was like, I've already had cancer, and I had the spine surgery. It might be me who's not with you. And it was, she's looking in like in total horror, going, oh my gosh, like, no, 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 that won't be the case. But we had such a lovely conversation of the things that she's proud of. She said she's so proud of her two sons, and she's so proud of mom was a huge advocate of, we moved to America. What was her word? Let's assimilate to Western culture as opposed to like keeping the Indian culture. An example would be her brothers and sisters. She brought seven of them here. Some of the aunts continue to wear saris. And my mom was like, well, no, we need to assimilate. This isn't India. And remember, mom was a professional too. So she was really happy that she was able to keep the love instilled with her that she learned in India, but come and integrate into a Western world and create a family based off that. And so I thought that was so touching that she also said, Mom's a hardcore girl power, but she would never tell you that ever. She would rather show it to you. And so she said she was really pleased that in her life, coming to America as a woman of color, a woman of color and a Catholic, like she had all the things going against her at that time, and she really was able to lead with love and inspire other people where that didn't matter. which paved the way. This is 1969, 1975, that it paved the way for meritocracy. And I think my mom is maybe a founding mother of meritocracy and going against the odds and working hard and incorporating integrity. And she mentioned that she was proud of that. Interestingly enough, in that dialogue, I said, Mom's hair was always very short. And I said, I have to ask you, did you cut your hair because 70s and 80s? Did you cut it short because you worked in a world of men? And you should have seen her face. She said, I never thought about that, but now that you're saying it, yes, right? And today, after 30 years of Mom having short hair, today Mom has grown her hair out long.
She's grown her hair out. Oh, it's so interesting.
Yes, because
Wow.
the thought was, I need to. It's almost like by osmosis, you're trying to look more and more like the people around you. And even if you looked at Mom's professional attire, it was masculine, right? It was the suit jacket and the shirt, and it was still, of course, a female getup, but the attire of women in the 80s is substantially different than the professional attire for women today. So she pointed that she was proud of that. Um, the one thing she said that she thought she could have done differently is that she thought she should have been a doctor, but her parents didn't really give her that type of guidance. It was more like, oh, go be a nurse. And I think that even had more to do at the time of females not necessarily being revered so well as doctors. So the plight of Mom's life had a lot to do with her gender and really fitting in as a strong-minded, totally capable woman in a time where women weren't given the opportunity or revered to be met with that. So it's really, really fascinating.
Well, I feel like what's so interesting in hearing you talk about, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and hearing your mom talk about your mom and these pretty bold choices. Like, she decided to enter this space. She sort of figured out how to assimilate, how to integrate, but also still had her own truth. And I'm curious how you see that reflecting in your own life. And I know that you spent over 20 years in finance, right? So in a world that doesn't necessarily reflect any of the things that we've been discussing here today. And I'm curious if you can just talk about this leap of faith that you've sort of recently made, this shift in your professional life, but also, I guess, in sort of the way you view yourself and your purpose and your meaning. What's happened there, and if you feel like it is due in part to your mom's influence?
There's an Abraham Lincoln quote that I'm going to botch, but I think I might be able to just pull it in a second because it's been the modus operandi for my whole life. Here it is. All that I am or hope to be, I owe to my angel mother, Abraham Lincoln. And that just, it resonates with me because so much of the blessings and the challenges of my life came from the love and grace of my mother. I'm going to answer your question in two parts. One is I've learned so much about authenticity that I wrote a book about it. But this authenticity is often overused of a term. What is authenticity? It's the alignment with your true self. And that's it. And before I jump into that, I'll say what I did when I graduated from the executive MBA program. I sent invitation to everyone perpetrating that I was going to have a graduation party for myself. And we ended up having like 150 people show up to the place of our wedding reception. And surprise, it was a party for my mother. And it was a celebration of life party for my mother. We had speakers. I bought a trophy that's a celebration of life. And, it really opened to me, having lost dad in my 20s, it just opened this pathway where why do we wait for the person to die to have the celebration of life? Why do we wait till it's too late before we honor them with this precious, precious moment of now that we have? And I'll say so many people came to me because I iterated this in the speech saying, I'm not waiting. I want the world to know I love you and we're celebrating your life. And we all honor you and look at your generations. And initially, Mom was not happy. Mom doesn't like the focus being put on her.
Glory.
What if she did not? She was. It took her a little bit to warm up to the fact that she was being honored, and then in time, she had that true smile. But there's so much life lessons to be learned in this whole notion of honor and love the people that you have while you have them, which then catapults me into, yes, I didn't exactly abruptly resign. If you talk to my former boss, they would say I abruptly resigned. But
we both outed him today. You could tell the story.
Yes. This notion of true alignment. I knew I wasn't being fulfilled, and I knew that I'm not a lazy person. There wasn't a situation where, hey, I want to go and just sit on a beach for a year. I knew there was more for me. And for as long as I was working in the death trap of corporate America, this authentic alignment with the zest of my soul would be repressed and put into a box and categorized in a warehouse with closed doors. And it was really impacting me. It was impacting my soul, and it was making me sick. And I finally told my wife, I'm not doing this anymore. And then comes the birth of the authenticity deficit. Initially started as what financial advisors need to do to be relevant. And now, as I've been doing podcasts and I was guest speakers in all these places, and what's emerged now is authenticity is relevant to all of us. And if we sincerely, with this relentless pursuit, look to be truthful to what is core to us and what is core to us being fulfilled, the world by osmosis becomes a better place. But mainly, you get your fulfillment. So I did interview my mother in the spirit that we were doing this podcast, but I also did it in the spirit of this love for alignment with myself. My mom has had so much to do with who I am yesterday, today, and tomorrow that I was honestly interested. Like, hey, let's do this. And Mom's been in and out. She's on her third stroke. She's been in and out of sickness, and watching her posture or listening to her posture. I did it over the phone. I could tell she was sitting up, and I could hear a difference in her tonality. And she was just so excited to talk about her story. Well, I took that to a different level, Jamie. And I took my 3 children and I put them in our living room. We have a room that's the no tech room. It's our prayer room. You're not allowed to have tech. Family goes in there to pray. And I sat the 3 kids down and I had Grandma sit in the room. And I said, children, one of the most important skill sets you have to learn in your life is active listening. And your mom and your dad and my mother and your grandfather, we all have so many degrees that if our house were to ever run out of heat, we could burn all our degrees and get through 2 winters with all that paper. And nowhere in our academic curriculum was this notion or the discussion around how important listening is. And so they're looking at me, okay, here goes Dad again.
And what?
And then, so I said, let's make it simple. God gave you 2 eyes, and he gave you 1 mouth, and he gave you 2 ears. So you need to look and listen double than you speak. And God just made it mathematically easy for you. And so I put a notebook in each of the children's hands with the pen. I said, we're going to play a game. And I have little speakers built in the ceiling, and I ported the audio recording from my phone to the ceiling, and we listened
of the interview you had done with your mom.
And we listened to the interview I did with Mom, and I would pause every 20 minutes. And at the 20 minutes, okay, bing, here's your chance to earn points. And Isaac, my son, would ask Elizabeth, the eldest, okay, where was Grandma Holden born? And if she didn't get it, well, then Isaac got a point. And then he'd go and cross to Catherine, his sister. Okay, what did Grandma study during this time? And the kids, they never cease to amaze me. These are children. They're 8, 10, and 11. And the children were asking such detailed questions and they were excited because they wanted to get the points. They wanted the bragging rights. And interestingly enough, I said, okay, well, I failed to mention this. I said, whoever gets the most points gets to have a quality, do whatever you want with Grandma. Mm-hmm. And All three kids stated one wanted to go to the mall, one wanted to go just for a walk in the forest reserve, and one wanted mom's famous curry chicken dinner. And so it's like now they're all aligned and they're playing for it. But this is where the divine kicks in. The divine kicks in is I'm watching my mother who's lived a life of service. And I'm watching her sincerely, I'm watching her soul be totally satisfied by the curiosity and the love and the awe of her three grandbabies as it relates to the story of her life. And it was probably the coolest. I think that moment that happened only a couple weeks ago, I think that even surpassed having 150 people in a room honoring her because this was so intimate, it was so personal, and it was divine. And that's where my life is going to now is I think there's so many embedded mechanisms in our world, in our societies, that make us lose sight. We're so obstructed by the noise that we lose sight of the most important, our authenticity, our love, how we honor the people who are closest to us. And then, quite frankly, that then transcends to how we serve the world and make people better. So that's the legacy I'm looking to inspire. As a matter of fact, I'm working on, because I'm in finance, forgive me, there's a 86, $87 trillion wealth transfer in the world right now.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, 88% of the heirs will not choose their parents' financial advisor. And that tells you a lot about inauthenticity. And that has a lot to do with the book I wrote, but even more recently I wrote a non-compliance obscured. You see, in corporate you're not allowed to have your own thoughts and your own ideas and your own right. And so you just fall into whatever they hide behind this word that says compliance. Compliance is important, but it's also something they weaponize. And so I wrote a non-compliance weaponized financial plan that teaches families how to manage their finance as an enterprise, as a village. And I sat with the 8, the 10, and the 11-year-old and my grandparents, and we had we call it the Holden board meeting now. And the notion is to inspire people to live their fullest life to max flourishing and trying to share their talents and abilities with as many people as they can. And I think that's the zest and the secret of life. Honestly, Jamie, it's what you're encapsulating here with what you're doing with these recordings. It's these are the things that you will think about on your deathbed. Nothing else. You won't think about, did I hit my annual bonus, or am I going to get a meets expectations, and none of that. You will think of none of that. What you will think about is the conversations that we had here today as it relates to your own story. So why not, at least right now, the world is walking around putting 99% of their time into the things that they will not think about before they die. And they're putting 1% into the things that they'll think about. Why not at least just take the 1% and make it a little higher? you know,
Indeed. And I really want to thank you for so eloquently putting that and reminding, but inspiring people to not only think about how important these themes of life are. I mean, it's kind of I'm understating it, themes of life, what life is really about. But also thank you so much for this really concrete, actionable example of, okay, so we can document, one person's life story, but how can we make this really interactive? How can we make this fun for the grandchildren or great grandchildren or children of the person who's being honored? Because that's what it kind of ultimately is about. I think you hit the nail on the head in saying that was more important to her than the party. I mean, parties are wonderful and important as well, but the people who really are going to carry on her legacy and take her torch are your children, and her other grandchildren. So thank you so much for just giving that inspiration to our listeners. In closing, I have one last question for you, which is, I know you have asked your mother lots of questions, but I'm wondering if there's one last question, could be silly, could be profound, one last thing that you would still like to ask her.
You know, I really could ask as she thinks about her legacy. And I've taken the family recently through what legacy is in this new financial plan that I wrote. But I'd really like to know if mom were to list out the top 5 things of her legacy in the story of her life, that it would mean so much to her that it was installed and carried forward in the children. What would that be? What would
What would
that
those
be?
top things be?
Although I have a very good idea, I think that'd be a wonderful question. It'd be a wonderful question to ask her.
Mm.
Uh, she ended her 1 hour and 10-minute interview. I said, "What advice do you have for the kids?" And she said, "Just always love God and know that love is really just it's the cornerstone of the world." But I think a more definitive, well, what would you like these children to carry with? I'll ask her that today, Jamie. Thank you for even posing that.
Yeah. I'll just end by saying the one thing I would want to ask her is for her chicken curry recipe.
I will get that for you, Jamie. We will not.
Can you send it over?
Or I will get that for you, and you'll have to let me know.
Michael, it's been a total pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your mom with me and with the listeners.
Yes, thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Thank you, Jamie.